Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that. But it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's prolonlife.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Hi, it's Kellyanne Conway.
And I'm David Plouffe, and we have some surprising news. We're teaming up for a brand new podcast, The Campaign Managers.
I know what you're thinking. Why would Plouffe and Kellyanne do this?
Because frankly, Kellyanne, we disagree on just about every issue, except about what it takes to win a presidential campaign. Kellyanne ran Donald Trump's campaign. I ran Barack Obama's campaign. We understand things like early vote. We understand how to leverage an opportunity and how to play defense when you've made a mistake.
2024 is an election like none other. And David Plouffe and I are going to take you behind the scenes like no one else can.
We're going to lean into our one-of-a-kind experiences, really educate our listeners about what to keep an eye on, and discuss the current strategies and tactics that both campaigns are deploying on the campaign trail.
We're going to disagree, we're going to dissent, but we're going to deliver. You won't want to miss this unique pairing. Join us by listening to The Campaign Managers with Kellyanne Conway and David Plouffe.
The first episode is out May 22nd, available wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, what do you do when someone keeps committing crimes and the law does nothing about it? Well, this is the story of how one small town plotted to get rid of the town bully permanently. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my bully co-host, Alice. And in this instance, I mean it in the English way, Alice.
Bully for you. Bully
for you.
I actually knew what that descriptor meant, so thank you for a descriptor in somewhat other language-ish that I can understand. Yeah.
I mean,
we are from England.
The English would probably say it's their
English.
language, but
Bully for you for getting that,
Yeah.
Alice.
yeah, whatever. Whatever. We all know. Everybody speaks American these days. It's okay.
Well,
It's okay.
everyone speaks American these days. No. But very good job, Brett. I'm always so proud of you when you pick a descriptor that is related to our case as well, because we haven't talked a lot about bullies yet, and this is very interesting.
Look, if you guys don't know this story, this is a fascinating story. I mean, just one that will make you think for a long time. We're going to go through the story. The facts are pretty straightforward. The mystery is a mystery to all of us, but not to hundreds of people. But the implications are what I think is most fascinating about this case. And we want to dig into those as well. And some of you know exactly the story we're going to tell today. It's the story of Ken Rex McElroy, or McElroy, and his untimely end He was a guy who, if you wrote him in fiction, people probably wouldn't believe it. And you're going to see how he terrorized a small town until the town decided to strike back. And look, this is a story, it's definitely a story of vigilantism, but it's also a story about the failure of law enforcement and what happens when the justice system doesn't do its job. And at what point are people forced to take matters into their own hands? So we're going to tell you the story. And then I think we're going to spend some time just, me and Alice talking about that and talking about, what happened here. It's something that's been celebrated. It's something that's been condemned. It's a case that divides people. And I think it's one you're going to enjoy. Well, Alice, unless you have anything else, I'll just go ahead and dive into the facts.
I think you should, because the facts are pretty terrible, and you're going to see why. Bully is just not a strong enough word for Ken.
It's really not. Bully is the term that's often used, but terror might be a better one. So this goes all the way back to 1981. What a fantastic year. Really the best year of my birth. All you
It
1981
was a
people out
good
there.
year. This is a total tangent, but I have to celebrate your decade, I guess. I was born in the 80s, but like I came of age in the 90s. Guys, I've been listening to like Spotify, Alexa, all the different streaming apps playlists for 80s rock ballads. Just say, Alexa, play 80s rock ballads. If you're about our age, you will just lay on the couch and be like adored with songs for like 3 hours straight. It was, I don't know why it took me so long to find this playlist, but I bring this up because fantastic music, a time when music and lyrics kind of embodied this romanticism of life, right? Small town life, that we're going to make it big. It's going to be okay. We start out in a small town, but we're going to make it. And this story, I think, is so interesting because it's set in a time of a lot of romanticism. Things can get better, yet you'll see that it's not getting better for this particular town.
Don't stop believing, Alice. Don't stop believing.
Just love it so much.
I mean, I gotta say, 1981, the thing about being born in 1981 is you're right on the cusp. If you want to be Generation X, you can be Generation X. If you want to be a millennial, you can be a millennial. You just get to pick. So, whatever. In between. Me and my in-between people, we all rise up. Anyway, so much like the people of Skidmore, Missouri, which is where we're going. In 1981, Skidmore, Missouri, which is a little town in the northeast corner up near Nebraska, in Missouri. It is about as small town as you can get. There was a 60 Minutes did a show on this case back in I guess 1981, not long after that, if it didn't. And Morley Safer, looking basically as old as he always looked, was down there doing the case. But there were a lot of shots of Skidmore, and it was the typical town. Just one road goes straight down. You can see where the town begins and you can see where the town ends, and then the road goes on forever. And that's the kind of town Skidmore, Missouri was. There were 437 residents in the Skidmore metropolitan area, and this was a small farming community. It was extremely close-knit. The kind of place you see in every Dateline episode. Everybody knew everybody. They were all close friends, and nobody locked their doors. That is until Ken Rex McElroy started doing his thing. Now, McElroy was born on June 1st, 1934. Like most people in town, he was part of a family of poor tenant farmers. He grew up right outside Skidmore alongside his, get this, 15 siblings. Bless his mother. 15 siblings. I don't know. That's a lot. That's 15 years of being pregnant. Not to mention the whole raising children thing.
I think it's more than 15 years. Somehow
it's more than that.
But I think this is all really interesting as well within that, right? Obviously, they didn't have a lot of means, but with 15 siblings, and this is not for all large families, but if you have someone like Ken, who we're going to talk about, and clearly there was no one quite like him, I think, in most towns, I wonder how much that played into kind of maybe lack of oversight with many siblings, although your siblings are supposed to look out for you too. So I don't know. He really does boggle my mind in a lot of ways, because it seems like there were so many things along the way that could have righted him in his path, or at least constrained him so he wasn't such a terror. Siblings can be a wonderful thing in terms of community, social support, but also social pressure to act a certain way, right? My boys are the most peer pressure on each other of acting appropriately because they immediately tattle on the other. So I think this is a really interesting thing that could cut either way. You can say 15 siblings, he didn't have enough oversight. Alternatively, he had like 14 other people who were his direct community members.
Well, I think, the problem probably for him was his parents were already struggling, and feeding, clothing, and taking care of 15 kids is a lot. And Ken, he was often hungry, he was often neglected. And I just wonder if there was some point in time where he said, one day I'm going to get out of this, I'm never going back, and whatever it takes, I'm going to do it. And in addition to all of this poverty and hunger and want that he grew up in, he also suffered a pretty severe head injury when he was only 18 years old. He was working at a construction site, helping to sort of provide for the very large family, and a steel slab fell on him, hit him in the head, kind of thing that might kill somebody. It didn't kill him, but some people have speculated that that injury might be the thing that would explain some of his later behavior. But whatever the case, and despite how he grew up, he would eventually find quite a bit of success for himself. He started off basically as a cattle rustler. He would steal livestock from local farmers and sell it. And the great thing about stealing something and then selling it is it's pure profit. You make 100% profit on that. You don't have to worry about the investment. And he also gained a reputation as being a rough and tumble guy, the kind of guy you didn't mess with. And the kind of guy, if you noticed him walking off of one of your sheep, maybe you just leave better enough alone. The sheep's not worth your life. And so that's what he did. He used that money to buy some land. And then basically he turned the tables where he had grown up, tenant farmer, sharecropper. Now he's the landowner. He's the one leasing the land out. He also became very adept at raising and training dogs for various purposes, racing dogs, and in particular hunting dogs. And his dogs were prized possessions. And the people who bought them from him would become not only loyal customers, but good friends who in later times would be willing to give some alibis to him that he would very desperately need, and that would help him out and would explain some of the things we're going to talk about later. But very early on, and really throughout his entire life, McElroy, he not only walked the line between legal and illegal, he was someone who, because of his willingness to resort to violence, was feared and respected, and because he made a lot of money, also had that advantage going for him.
And this is really interesting because whenever you have criminal cases, one of the things we've talked about is the defense counsel bringing mitigation evidence about the defendant. And so you're hearing a lot of the potential mitigation evidence for Ken, right? That he grew up very poor, hungry, neglected, and he had trouble reading and writing, but not necessarily because of low IQ, but because he had to drop out of school in eighth grade. Maybe not had to, but he chose to drop out of school in eighth grade to, try and help out his family. And though we've talked about this, steel slab falling on his head and potentially causing brain damage, note that he does continue on with his life with quite a level of sophistication still, though. It's not right to be stealing livestock and selling it, but he doesn't stop there. He's not just like some common criminal, right? He turns that around and turns it into a landowning business, and he learns to train dogs. And those of you who train dogs, there's a level of sophistication, dedication, consistency that needs to come with that day in and day out. It's not something you drop in for a day, train them really hard, and then you're done. Especially with racing dogs, it has to be something every single day. So, I don't know the impact. We don't know the impact that steel slab had on his head. It probably did do something. But I know all this because there's another side to this. It's not like the steel slab hit his head and then he stopped being able to function and he was only a terror. He clearly had the capability to do amazing things with his life, but he didn't choose to kind of stay on the legal side of things. So over the years, as you've already begun to hear, McElroy had amassed quite a criminal record. He had been indicted 21 times on various charges: robbery, harassing and assaulting women, destroying property, threatening people, and even shooting two people. And we call this, up until now, it's almost like, okay, you're a bully, but when you start becoming a trigger puller, then you've crossed the line from just being a bully to a real danger to your community here. And here's the thing, despite being charged 21 times and some of them very serious crimes, such as shooting two people, just about point blank for both of them. He always got off because he had an excellent defense attorney, Richard Gene McFadden. And even though he had fantastic counsel, McElroy didn't leave all of the defense just to his attorney. He wasn't going to sit idly by while these charges were pending. Rather, he had a habit of intimidating witnesses, stalking them, showing up at their homes until they agreed not to testify out of fear, and other, I guess you could say, bullying tactics to ensure that he would get off. So I'm not saying McFadden's not a fantastic defense attorney, but he certainly had a client who was doing everything he could illegally in his power to make sure that no witnesses would show up so that these charges couldn't be led to a conviction. So this is not an exaggeration when I said he got off every single time. Of the 21 felony indictments, McElroy was convicted 0 times. 0. Meaning he not only didn't really have a criminal history at all, he didn't serve any time or have any repercussions for these 21 instances where he clearly broke the law. And those of you who know anything about the criminal justice system, he didn't just break the law 21 times, right? He harassed a lot of people before that first phone call and that first arrest was made. But I mean, I would say with each one, he got emboldened because we see this all the time with our people. We see this with human nature, our children. You shoot one person, you get off. Shoot another person, why wouldn't you get off again? So what's going to keep you from shooting a third, fourth, fifth, sixth person? Really nothing. Because here, this town isn't going to do anything about it. This justice system isn't going to do anything about it. Even if the police arrest him, so what? He'll go to court, intimidate all the witnesses, and get off scot-free. By 1981, Ken McElroy had firmly established himself as the town bully. And again, he is not just a bully. The next thing I'm going to tell you that he did is going to make your blood boil because it is so bold and so it's an affront to the entire community of 437 people. While it's a crime against one person, it's really a crime against the entire community. So he rapes and marries a local teenager. And by teenager, I mean a young girl. And then he shoots the beloved town grocer again, point blank. After these kind of two things, Skidmore had had enough. So the residents gathered and made a plan to end McElroy's reign of terror once and for all.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Yeah. And so now, if that was enough, we're going to get into some of the things that he did and what happened and how he got away with them. And, I will say this, his defense attorney must have been incredible. And he is often interviewed in the various documentaries that have been done on this. I don't think there's ever been a great documentary done on this. I mean, this is a case that deserves the full Netflix treatment. It hasn't been done. It should be done. But there's a lot of different things on YouTube you can watch, and they're worth checking out. And the 60 Minutes, frankly, from 1981 might be the best thing that's been done on it. But let's just go through the timeline and talk about some of the stuff he did. Now, we're going to start about 10 years before 1981. But I think as we've laid out, this man's reign of terror goes back to the 50s. I mean, basically from the time he got hit in the head with the steel when he was 18 forward, he is doing this kind of stuff. But let's start in 1971 and start with that first incident that Alice mentioned. So McElroy, he begins harassing a local 6th grade student, Trina McLeod. Now, he would do things like, and he's married at the time. I mean, not that matters, I guess, but he is married at the time. At this
To an
point, he would,
adult,
yeah,
might I
to an
add.
adult. He would follow her school bus around and honk repeatedly until the driver would let Trina out to ride with Ken. Now, here's the thing. I mean, this should just already tell you what kind of person this is. What school bus driver is going to let a 6th grader off the bus to get in the car with some adult unless there's some fear there, right? You don't do that kind of thing.
And he's like a 40-something-year-old, right? This is not like some 20-year-old hanging out at the middle school. He's a grown man.
Yeah, and so Trina would report that Ken raped her. Now, this was a claim she would eventually drop. And she would later say, when she was confronted by this after Ken's death, that she made it up because she was jealous of him and someone else. I just want to remind you, she's in 6th grade when he starts this. And she would drop this charge, but in case you're wondering how old she was when she made it, she was 12. So she was 12 years old.
And we see this a lot, right? Unfortunately, in our child abuse cases, our victims are usually very young, and it is not uncommon to recant reports of abuse like this for a lot of reasons. You're going to see why. Trina's life is going to get very intertwined with Ken's, of course. But why? Just common sense. Use your mind. What else is a 40-something-year-old man doing honking after a school bus until the school bus driver lets the 12-year-old off the bus and into his car? Is he just going to like ride around and listen to 80s rock ballads, 70s rock ballads? Probably not, right? And just want to like buy her popsicles. So whatever her story is, this is not okay. This is not her parent. This is not a family member. He is a man who is quite literally stalking a 6th grade girl.
So by 1973, the fall of 1973, Trina is now in 9th grade. So, a veritable grown woman, at which point she becomes pregnant with her and Ken's first child. She drops out of school at this point. Despite still being married to his 3rd wife, Alice Woods, Ken moves her into their home. Now, shockingly, this relationship takes a bad turn, at which point Trina flees McElroy's house and returns to her parents' home when she's 14 years old, shortly after giving birth. So in response, Ken forces Trina to come back and then, for good measure, burns down her family's house and shoots their dog. So that's the kind of guy we're talking about here. And in case the prior events did not lead you to certain conclusions about this man.
And also, if you're wondering, I don't know anything about Trina's parents, but this is beginning to show you like why would you let Trina move into this man's house? Clearly, this man is just an absolute terror, and he is violent, incredibly violent. Trina, who knows what is happening in her mind, but she's been groomed and other things by this man for at least 2 years. And you can see what happens when she deigns to defy her captor. He kills the family pet, probably the most precious thing to her. I remember my childhood. My dog was my best friend, right? I mean, that's just cruel. That dog wasn't going to do anything to you. You just shot the dog because you wanted to hurt Trina and to make sure she never did something like this again, and burn down their family home. Again, this is not a well-to-do place. It's not like they can just move into the next home over. This is the epitome of don't you dare try this again. It will only be worse next time. So this time, I mean, this is a pretty public crime. He burned down Trina's family's home, and Ken was indicted for arson, assault, and statutory rape, because you don't need Trina to say it wasn't consensual. She was 14 when the child was born. Statutorily, she could not consent. So Ken was, despite these very serious and violent crimes, he was still released on a $2,500 bond pending trial. And this is very sad and shows you kind of the vulnerability of Trina. Both Trina and her child were placed in foster care because she's only 14. And I'm sure there were questions about whether her parents could take care of her because she ended up in this situation. Whether it's true or not, that's usually how the foster care system looks at it. Now, Ken, remember how we said he was indicted 21 times, but he had 0 convictions? How are you going to get out of this one? Because she definitely had your child. That's like provable. It's a walking, crawling evidence of your statutory rape. So, Ken, again, I think he's very intelligent, which is why I don't totally buy into this slab hitting his head being the reason that he does things that are without any sort of excuse. Ken goes on to divorce his third wife, Alice, and marry Trina, despite her still being a very young teenager. He does this so that he can avoid the statutory rape charge. And now, kind of with that charge away, remember that's the key. His relationship with Trina is what leads to the burning down of the house, the shooting of the dog, that whole thing. Kind of with that charge off the table, he was acquitted of the arson and assault charges. I think that's still a real problem with that justice system, whatever happened there. Like, he absolutely should have been convicted of arson and assault at the very least, and probably still statutory rape.
I don't know that you should be able to marry your way out of.
You can't marry your way out
when
of
the
it.
age difference is that great. I mean, if it was like a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old, maybe I could be like, okay, but like.
Right. I mean, this is just fair to say Skidmore is terrified of Ken, and they should be. And Ken is not terrified of anyone, and he's certainly not terrified of the law. So that brings us to July 1976. Ken gets in an altercation with a local farmer, Romaine Henry. Fantastic name for a farmer, by the way, which ended in Henry trying to chase Ken off of his land. So they're on Henry's land. Now, Ken takes out a shotgun and shot Henry twice in the stomach. Thankfully, Henry survived, and Ken was charged with assault with intent to kill. But yet again, when Ken's trial came around, McFadden, his attorney, had produced 2 witnesses who gave him a seemingly airtight alibi. These 2 witnesses showed up and testified that Ken couldn't have shot Henry because he was hunting with them the day of the shooting, and he was nowhere near the crime scene. Now, with 2 witnesses with a seemingly rock-solid alibi, it's not really surprised that Ken was found not guilty. Although, I don't know what he did to intimidate those 2 witnesses to show up and probably lie for him. Now, Henry claimed that Ken was outside of his house upwards of 100 times before trial, trying to intimidate him not to go forward with these charges, not to testify, all of those things. So if Henry himself, of course, he may be biased. Maybe he showed up 1 time. 1 time is too many, by the way. You can't intimidate any witnesses or the person who's, the victim of your crimes that you're being charged with. But 100 times, if he's doing that to Henry, probably he's doing this to the 2 witnesses who showed up, intimidating them to testify for him. We don't know that for a fact. There's nothing in the record for that, but we can extrapolate what is happening because he does have this habit of intimidating witnesses and victims.
I just want you to imagine this for a second, that you're in a town of 400 people and there's a guy who sticks a shotgun in a dude's stomach and pulls the trigger, shoots him with both barrels. How he survived that, that's a miracle they did. Ken would actually tell a friend of his that he was upset because he thought that would be enough to kill him. And then obviously he wouldn't be able to testify and he'd get away with it. So he was upset that he didn't die. But, face to face, Ken was stealing some of his stuff. That's why I was trying to get him off the property. He testifies and says, I looked the man in the eye. He shot me in the stomach at point blank range, and he gets off. What kind of message does that send to the town? Now, how are you feeling now about the town's ability to protect you? Not great. And it's only going to get worse. And I got to say this, Trina, we're going to talk about Trina some more. Ken has been grooming her since she was 12, raped her when she was 12. By this point, I mean, she is completely under his spell. And you're going to see that as we go on. And we'd go all the way forward to 1980. And Trina is in the local grocery store with one of McElroy's daughters. I believe it's one of his daughters from a prior marriage. He had kids from several different marriages. What's interesting about this, it's not entirely clear that Trina was there initially, The witness said it was 2 children who were there. Trina basically was a child, so it's not definitive that it's her, but we're pretty sure it was her. The grocer and his wife see McElroy's daughter stealing some stuff, stealing some candy, basically. And they confront Trina about it. And they say, hey, she's put that in her pocket or whatever. Are you going to pay for that? And Trina basically says, do you know who her dad is? You're going to meet Ken McElroy now. And then goes off and tells him that they accuse them of stealing. Well, he is, infuriated that anyone would. His good name is being besmirched by this accusation. And at that point, he flies down to the grocery store. He tells them they're gonna pay for it, and he spends months harassing the family. He would park outside their house. He would yell at them and watch them. He would fire his shotgun into the air over their house, just terrorizing them. And there was nothing anyone could do about it. Now, one day, Bo, who is the owner, is sitting on the back loading dock. It's the morning. He's sitting in a chair. He's drinking some coffee. Well, McElroy shows up with a shotgun. He points the shotgun at him. And the one good thing is Bo knew enough about McElroy that he knew this wasn't a threat. He was going to shoot him. So he dodges out of the way at the last minute. He pulls the trigger, and rather than literally blowing his head off, he shoots him in the side of the neck. So he ends up on the ground. McElroy jumps in his truck, speeds off. Tons of witnesses see this, including the town marshal. Town marshal runs up. He saves Bo's life, and Bo survives this and brings McElroy up on charges of attempted murder. At which point, McElroy goes to the town marshal, and says, are you going to testify against me? And he said, well, I have to. I'm the marshal, and I saw the whole thing. And McElroy says, well, I'm not in the habit of letting somebody try and put me in prison for the rest of my life and letting that person live. At which point, the marshal quits his job, leaves town, and gets a job installing cable. He was like, I'm not having anything to do with this guy. So he just books it out of town. He's done. So McElroy, he is arrested, and he is going to be charged for this. And for the first time, this is number 22 on the felony list for McElroy. For the first time, the charges are actually going to stick.
Whew, this guy gets my blood boiling.
This guy.
Okay, so with this marshal, look, I get it. We've definitely been threatened before. No one has quite threatened me to end my life if I, bring a charge or something. So I haven't been in his same shoes. And clearly, Ken is someone who is capable of being violent and carrying through with his violent threats. But this marshal, it was a selfish thing to do for him to do this. I understand the fear. I absolutely do. But when we get faced with these sort of situations and we have faced threats, you turn around and slap them with another charge. You get witness protection. There are things that you can take, but it seems like everyone just decided, you know what? He's too dangerous. Let him be someone else's problem. And this is going to lead us to the vigilante justice we will see later, because this doesn't happen overnight. The town doesn't decide, we're just going to take out one guy. So it's helpful to see the kind of progression of lawlessness that is allowed to happen under Ken's reign of terror. So this brings us to 1981. Ken utilizes his usual tactics of intimidating the witnesses for months leading up to this trial of him shooting Bo point blank. But the Bowenkamps were sick of his constant harassment, and they held strong. They were not going to be intimidated. They knew what all of McElroy's tendencies were, and they're like, no, I am, by the grace of God, alive. We are pressing charges. This guy, the 22nd time, is going to be the charm. He's not going to continue to terrorize our community. Now, McElroy's trial for attempted murder began. His defense attorney, again, Richard Gene McFadden, tried to paint Bowenkamp as the aggressor. A little bit tough, but again, this
worked before.
It has worked before, but only one person has a blast hole through their neck, not the other one. And he claims that Bowenkamp was the one who actually came at Ken with a knife, and McElroy had no choice but to defend himself. So essentially, this is a self-defense theory. In the end, McElroy was convicted, but not of the original charge of attempted murder, but of the lesser charge of assault. So instead of a serious sentence, he received just 2 years. But you may think, well, at least 2 years, he can get off the streets and stop killing people, because you can tell that his crimes are escalating in violence. The relief for the residents of Skidmore would not last long, because the judge allowed McElroy out on bond pending an appeal of the conviction. And even if he went to prison, everyone knew that McElroy was looking at just a few months in prison at the most, because of the way sentences work, where if you're sentenced to 2 years, you may serve a few months, good behavior, you're out on parole. This is not going to do it for the town of Skidmore. And if you're feeling frustration, you should be. I mean, this is, how many people do you have to shoot? And they were shot to be killed. These were not warning shots. He didn't shoot them in the foot. He tried to blow off Bowenkamp's face, and he just missed because Bowenkamp dodged. He tried to kill Romaine Henry and shot him in the stomach twice. But again, he somehow survived. These people should have been dead. These shouldn't have been attempted murder cases. They should have been homicide cases. And instead, he keeps walking. And even though he has a conviction this time, it looks like he's going to walk. And he's quite literally walking while the appeal is pending.
And the thing is, appeal bonds are pretty rare. It's one thing to get a bond before you're convicted. But usually once you're convicted of any kind of violent crime, you're going to be remanded to custody, even if you're going to have an appeal. We talked about this, and I forget when we talked about it. But we've talked about it in some prior episode. But not in this case. In this case, you got a guy who's charged with attempted murder, who gets convicted of assault. The prosecuting attorney was a few months out of law school, and later say he had no idea how dangerous this guy was when he prosecuted him. And they sort of did the best they could. This is the charge that they got to stick. But the judge is going to let him out. And, appeals take a while. So he's going to be out a while, no matter what. And even if he goes away, it's only going to be for a few months. It's going to be a short vacation at best. And it only is going to get worse. So the townspeople of Skidmore, they are growing more and more concerned about the threat McElroy held for this community. And they're hearing him. He's boasting around town about what he's going to do to Bo Bowenkamp now that he's out on bond. This time, he's not going to miss. And a lot of the townspeople, they went to the courthouse and they saw the sentencing and they saw justice fail them. And they decided they weren't going to wait on the law anymore. So on the morning of July 10th, 1981, several townspeople met with the county sheriff. Remember, their marshal has fled town, so they don't have him. So they meet with the county sheriff at the American Legion Hall in Skidmore to discuss what they can do to protect themselves and the town from McElroy. And it's a little unclear what exactly was said at this meeting. There were pretty much every male in the community was there. Not all of them, but most of them. And the sheriff supposedly suggested that they should try some sort of neighborhood watch. But he told them, at least he would say later on, he told them, do not confront McElroy. He's always armed. He's always going to be dangerous. But at this point, the residents of Skidmore, they're feeling the danger already, whether they confront him or not. They talked about how this was a town where you didn't lock your doors, but they started locking them now because of McElroy. McElroy at one point, there was, in a town like this has one big church that everybody goes to. McElroy had threatened the preacher several times. The preacher is afraid of McElroy. Everyone is afraid of McElroy, and it doesn't seem like law enforcement's going to do anything.
And there's there's also this additional thing, I said at the very beginning, when he rapes and marries this teenage girl from the town, it's kind of an affront to the entire town, because he's clearly been married now 4 times. And if he can do it to this 12-year-old girl, what's going to stop him from going after the next, 6th grade girl, maybe younger? So the next daughter, the next granddaughter, the next niece of another person in this 400-person town. And here he is, not just like his other crimes, doing it and walking away with it. He's getting to wear this particular crime, what he's done to Trina, her entire family, the dog, as a badge on his shoulder, right? He gets to walk around with her as his wife and the children that they have together. The boldness of that type of thing for this small town is just a constant reminder how he has crowned himself King Terror.
And so the people at this meeting made it pretty clear to the sheriff that suggestion wasn't good enough for them, that they were tired of this, that action needed to be taken. And so the sheriff at this point, he not only leaves the meeting, but he gets out of town. He leaves town. So now you've got the people of Skidmore, you've got Ken McElroy, you got no law enforcement anywhere. It's basically the Wild West. And the question that is on everybody's mind is, what do we do? How do we stop this?
So the mob headed down to the D&G Tavern where McElroy was having a morning drink, not a nightcap, but a morning drink with his wife Trina. When McElroy and Trina got up to leave the bar, the group followed him outside. Now, Trina and Ken got into Ken's Chevy Silverado, and all of a sudden, shots rang out, and Ken had been hit by a bullet. Now, one of the men in the mob opened the passenger door of the truck and escorted Trina out of the vehicle and into a nearby bank. They did not want to hurt Trina. Their target was Ken. And all that we know is that many, many shots rang out for 20 seconds more. McElroy had been hit twice with bullets from 2 different guns, and a mob of 30 to 60 residents witnessed the attack, but no one called an ambulance. Instead, they watched as the man who had terrorized them for years bled out on the steering wheel. When they knew the job was done and Ken's terror had been ended, the mob simply dispersed, returning to life as normal. Ken McElroy was dead at the age of 47.
And when they describe this, when you hear people describe this whole scene, it's amazing. So they leave the American Legion Hall and they go down to where they're drinking. And everybody says that these people just walk into the bar and surround the table where McElroy and Trina are, but they don't say anything. They just stand there staring at them while they're sitting there until finally they're like, we're going to leave. So Ken and his wife, they leave and they just follow them out. And then the shooting starts. And one person said, when he got shot, his foot fell on the accelerator. So the car's in park, the engine's going. And like Al said, nobody does anything. So the engine just goes until the engine burns up and it's like smoking. And the smoke from the car was the first sign that anybody, because nobody called the police. Trina's locked up in the bank. She can't say anything, and they don't let her out for a while. So it takes a while for anybody to even show up. He'd been hit twice. There were at least 3 different calibers of bullets found. So there were at least 3 guns. There could have been more than that. We just know there were 3 calibers. So this was kind of a miracle. He was only hit twice, but twice did the job, and he's dead. And as I said, Trina is brainwashed at this point. Like she later on will tell 60 Minutes that Ken was the perfect gentleman. He had never done anything to anybody. She had no idea why they would want to do this. They were just out to get him because he was so successful, and it's remarkable to see that and everything he had done to her. And she's been brainwashed by him. She'll later bring a lawsuit against the town for his death.
And even at this point, she's been with him for 10 years, right? I mean, the majority of her life. He's literally not just groomed her, but been able to educate her in the Ken fashion. So it doesn't surprise me that this is not just Stockholm syndrome, but she was a mere child when she met him, and he was able to shape her entire outlook on life.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's why she was so under his power. So they launched, a massive investigation is launched into his murder. This becomes a national story. This story goes viral back when going viral wasn't a thing. This is every newscaster who was alive in 1981 who's famous, whether it's Brokaw or anybody is reporting on this story. It's on every nightly news station. It just grabs the attention of people. 60 Minutes goes down there to do it. The local authorities, they canvass the area. The sheriff shows up back up in town to try and figure out what happened. They interview basically everyone in town. They're knocking on doors, trying to see if they could find any witnesses, but no one saw anything. The common refrain was, well, when the shot started, I took cover because I didn't want to get hit. So I didn't see anything. I have no idea who did it. No idea who fired anything. And the suspect pool was endless. Everyone in town had some reason to want Ken dead. We've said before that if more than two people know a secret, and the only way to keep it is if one of them's dead. This is the exception to that rule, because in this town, pretty much everyone knew who did it. I mentioned the preacher earlier. They asked him at one point if he knew who did it. He said no. He was actually out of town that day, so he might actually have been telling the truth. But they said, if you knew who did it, would you turn them in? And he said no. And they asked him why. And he said, well, there's a verse in the Old Testament. He who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. And just left it at that. And I think that was basically the feeling of the people in town, that this guy, at this point, this was the only solution. And whoever was brave enough to do it, it needed to be protected. And so everybody who interviewed said the same thing. They couldn't spot the shooter. They had no idea where the bullets came from. Trina claimed that she did see the shooter, and she identified a local farmer, Dale Clement, but there was no evidence tying Clement to the crime. He's never been charged. She actually could not say that she saw Clement fire the gun. She could only say that she saw him with a firearm. And there's this whole legend in town about the way the guns were dealt with, that basically at the end of this, everyone pulled the weapons together. They were broken up, taken out of town, dumped in various rivers so that they would never be found. So even if Dale Clement did it, his gun would have been gone, and there was no way to tie it to the killing. The FBI gets involved, everybody gets involved, but nobody can find any evidence of who killed a man when his murder was witnessed by 60 people.
Also shows you how important it is to have trust. The witnesses have to have trust in the law enforcement system, right? We've talked about this a lot, where there may be certain communities that don't have crimes investigated or prosecuted. While that may be true because law enforcement may not be looking into them, oftentimes there may be a trust factor with that particular community. He was like, why would I tell you anything? He was like, why would I tell you anything? Law enforcement, you've done nothing for my community. In fact, you try to peg things on us that we don't want. When you don't have witnesses who talk, even something as public as Ken's, public execution, you're not going to find anything. Doesn't matter how good your agents are. Doesn't matter if you bring in the FBI and all the resources in the world. If you don't have witnesses to talk and you don't have evidence, you don't have a charge. Now, fast forward to 1984. 3 years after her husband's murder, Trina McLeod filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against several entities, including the county of Nodaway, the town of Skidmore, Dell Clement, Sheriff Dan Estes, and Skidmore Mayor Steve Peters. Ultimately, and this is tough for her, right? I mean, she probably didn't have much of an education after middle school, and she had been living with this man who provided for her for a decade. She had more than one child that she had to provide for, and all of a sudden, she probably didn't have much means to make a living to support her young family. And she had been brainwashed. She thought this man was the love of her life, the father of her children, a perfect gentleman to everybody. And it doesn't surprise me that in that state of mind, she brings this wrongful death lawsuit. Now, ultimately, this matter is settled out of court for $17,600. It did not lead to any information regarding Ken's killer. I suspect that the town just settled with her because they felt bad for Trina and wanted to help provide for her and her children. But it wasn't about feeling any remorse for Ken's death.
So what's interesting is, despite the fact that Ken was gone, this wasn't the end of the troubles for Skidmore. Some people claim that Skidmore was sort of cursed by this whole thing. And there have been some pretty well-known cases that have come out of this tiny little town. Remember, we said it only had like 400 people. But there's the disappearance of Branson Kane Perry in 2001 and the murder of Bobby Joe Stinnett in 2004. Those are both pretty famous cases in the true crime world. And the town kind of fell apart. A lot of people, there was all that attention on the town. It became sort of a, macabre, morbid tourist attraction. A lot of people moved out, left the town behind. There's not much left of it nowadays, and people sort of trace it all back to this day when this happened. And look, are we ever going to know who did this? I think the answer is probably no. We're going on 43 years now since this happened. And to this day, people will not say who did this. And there's probably multiple people who pulled the trigger, but none of those people have ever been identified. And as long as the people of Skidmore, the ones who are left, as long as they stay tight-lipped, this is going to be a mystery about what exactly happened, but certainly not why it happened. And, if you want to see I said this is right for a good documentary, and it is. There is a documentary on it. I believe it was a Sundance documentary. No One Saw a Thing, I think is what it was titled. And it interviews some of the people who are still left. I will say this. The very first guy they interview, they do one of those shots where like the guy's standing in front of his house smiling. One of the creepiest guys I've ever seen. Like when that guy smiles at the camera, it's like straight out of a horror movie. So it's worth watching the documentary just for that one scene. But it's a good documentary because it's all the people who are left, including some of the people directly involved. The daughter of the grocer talks about this. She lived through all this. And she was around when he was threatening her family, and she talks about it. So it's a very interesting thing to look back on and to see how the bonds of silence remain intact all these years later. And look, that's the story. And that's enough. I mean, the story is enough. It's an amazing story, mind-blowing story, great true crime thing. But I think it's something that's worth talking about a little bit. Not so much, normally we do theories at this point. We don't really need to do theories. But I do think it's worth talking about how this happened. And I guess the ultimate question is, if you were in these people's shoes, what would you have done?
Yeah, I think this raises so many questions that are, it's easy to look at this and just say, oh, this is vigilante justice. And also, this is the 80s. Like, would anything like this happen today? But I think this is a real lesson in what leads to vigilante justice. What happens when the justice system, the law enforcement kind of break down in any sort of confidence for the people who are supposed to be depending on it. And also, we clearly don't want vigilante justice on the regular, but is there ever a time when it's appropriate? This brought to mind a recent example from my home state, Texas. I can't remember the exact town, but it was a more rural town. And essentially, there was a father who had hired this man to do work at their farm. And he found that man who was, I don't know, a 30, 40-year-old man raping his young toddler daughter on their property. And it wasn't a heat of the moment thing. He walked back to his house, got his gun, came and shot the man in the face, killing him. And there was no arrest, no prosecution. That town was a very small town. And they were like, nope, that vigilante justice wasn't quite the same as this particular situation. But the entire town was like, no, we don't need to drag him through the criminal justice system because that was righteous. But if you extrapolate that to like, if that's how we did justice across like all of New York City or LA, is that the system we want to live in? That's an utter breakdown of law and order. And so in some ways, though this story, Ken McElroy's story, seems to be the lack of law and order, I would say that it was law and order lacking this entire time for decades that leads to the ultimate lack of law and order. And if you want law and order, which I think we do, because we want some sort of due process, some sort of justice, right? Some sort of process in it so that it isn't just someone gets to decide, one person gets to decide whether you're guilty and then execute the death penalty on you at their whim, right? They get to just show up at the bar and decide that that's the day you die. I don't think that's the system most of us want to live in. But the choices that we may make that lead to an utter breakdown of law and order, the rational outcome is going to be vigilante justice, which I don't think is really justice at all.
Yeah, the good thing about this story is how much it took to get these people to this point. This was not a one-off thing. This was sort of a catastrophic failure across the board of every single aspect of the justice system. You got the marshal quitting. You got, the sheriff shows up and basically says, well, you're on your own. Whatever you do, don't confront him because he's always armed. Like, yeah, that's part of the problem there, Chief. And then he just leaves. He's like, okay, well, I'm getting out of town. I'm going back to the county seat. Good luck. Right. Then you have the justice system. You have juries who won't convict. You have witnesses who are willing to purge themselves. You have judges who, when they do have the opportunity, I mean, the judge had to know. When you talk about bonds and whether to let somebody out, I mean, you can bring in all sorts of stuff if you're the prosecutor. The judge, maybe he convinced the jury that he, just assaulted the guy when he shot him in the neck, when he only shot him in the neck because he missed his head. Maybe he convinces the jury of that, but the judge should have known better. The judge should have said, you're not getting a bond for this. I don't care if they convicted you of trespassing, jaywalking. You're going to be in jail until your appeal is done, and then you're going to prison after you lose it. But instead of doing that, you had this cascading failure. And the thing about society and the thing about civilization is it's a fragile thing. And the most basic, we talk about this sometimes, the most basic reason for societies to exist is justice. You can do a pretty good job surviving on your own, out in the woods or whatever. And people did for a really long time, growing their own food or hunting their own food or whatever. But at some point, when enough people come together in a certain area, you're going to start having crime. And when you do, how are you going to deal with that? Is it just going to be sort of blood vendettas? And, well, you killed my friend, so now I'm going to kill you, and then your friend's going to kill me, and then my son's going to kill him. And the sort of thing you saw like in Sicily in the 1800s, where, there were no men in the towns because all the men had been killed by vendettas or whatever. Like, is that what you're going to have? Or are you going to set up a civilization and a society with a justice system? And this is why we talk about sometimes how important it is that our system is balanced. And one of the reasons we like to bring the perspective we do to true crime is because true crime is incredibly unbalanced. All the perspectives in true crime, or a lot of them, are from a perspective of the system is corrupt and the police are always conspiring to frame people. And, it needs to be easier to win an appeal, and it needs to be easier to get a new trial. It needs to be easier to be acquitted. It needs to be easier to get out on bail. Well, all of that came together in this case. This guy, he benefited not from that. I don't know how he managed to do everything he did, but he couldn't be convicted. And when he was convicted, he got out on bail and, and all this other stuff. And at some point, it just breaks down. At some point, people are not going to put up with it anymore. And they're going to start taking law into their own hands. And that's never a good thing. Is it as people from my town where I was growing up would say, I mean, sometimes people just need killing. And that was the perspective of the folks in Skidmore, is that he just needed killing. And they did it. They killed him. And was the world better off when he was dead? Absolutely. There's no question the world was better off. But was that the best thing for Skidmore? No. Was it the best thing for the people who had to do it? Absolutely not. Did those people break the law? Yes, they did. The thing is, even if they had been arrested, there was no grand jury that would have indicted and no jury that would have convicted. Not in that town. Like, you were going to have to go somewhere else if you wanted to get justice for Ken, because the people in that town were not going to give it to him. And I think it's a story that can just be fascinating and you can enjoy it, but it's a warning too. It's a warning that when things get this bad, people will not just sit on their hands. Like, at some point they will act. And look, you know what could have happened in this case? Trina could have been killed. Very easily, she could have been killed. And I don't care what she said and that she defended him and all the other stuff. She was an innocent victim of this man who had been brainwashed by him for the better part of a decade. And it would have been very easy for her to have been an innocent victim in this. And it was just by the grace of God that she wasn't, because they'd already shot him once by the time they got her out of the car. And I don't know. Like, I'm not going to condemn the people of Skidmore for doing this, because I think they had to. I think they were at a point where they just had to do something. Bo was going to die if they didn't do this. His family might have died. His daughter might have died. More people might have died. So they felt like they had to do it. But that doesn't make it a good thing. It is just an awful thing and an indictment of the justice system in that area at that time.
Beautifully said. I don't have much more to say, except I think what you emphasize is really important here. This was an interesting story. We are all fascinated, because my first response in learning about Ken was, man, what a bad dude. You're right. If he had not been killed there was going to be so much more violence. He promised it. He was going to go after Bowenkamp because Bowenkamp had the audacity to actually bring him to trial and get him convicted. This was not going to be Ken's last killing, and Trina wasn't going to be his last victim. He was going to continue to terrorize, and each crime that he got away with, and I think he got away with Bowenkamp's shooting because it was only an assault conviction and he was walking the streets and he was ultimately going to serve no time. He was going to get bolder and bolder. They had no choice because law enforcement failed them. And I think the takeaway from what you just said is this is a warning to all of us. Right? We talked about this a lot where people come to us and they're like, tear down the justice system. And we say, replace it with what? Because I don't think you actually want no system whatsoever. I don't think you actually want vigilante justice when you don't get to pick who the vigilante is. You don't get to be Batman running around deciding what justice is. That type of a world is not one we want to live in. We don't want what happened to Ken to have to be the only way we can get justice for our 6th grade child who's being raped and impregnated, right? We want real justice for Trina. If that had been stopped back in the 6th grade, her life would be wildly different. But instead, the justice system failed her and the town of Skidmore repeatedly until they had to take matters into their own hands. And I hope this is a warning story and a standalone and not something that we begin to see in towns and cities across the world. But, you know, we know our justice system the most, where people don't want there to be police. They don't want repercussions for violent criminals. And eventually the problem is the swing will go over the swing set. When people come for your own children, when they come and rape your children, like parents are not going to sit by and do nothing about it. And then we really do fall into utter disarray and chaos in a way that will not make this society a more just place.
Amen. Amen. And I think that's a good point to end this on. So I hope you both enjoyed this case, but I hope you've also, some thinking about it too. I'm very interested to see what the discussions about this on Twitter and the gallery and everywhere else, how they go, because we always have some good ones. And I know there'll be people on both sides of this. I know there'll be people who think this was absolutely what the town had to do. And there will be some people who say, no, that you should never do this. This was murder. That's all there is to it. It was an extrajudicial killing. And once you start justifying those, you end up in a very bad place. And we've been in a very bad place in our nation's history when it comes to this kind of stuff. And when people take the law into their own hands, they can end up doing some really horrible, terrible, awful things. So I'm glad that this story, one of the reasons it's so fascinating is because it is so rare. It's not like you see this every day, but it's definitely one that I think is going to be worth some discussion. Well, we want to hear what you guys think. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. And hello to all of you watching this on YouTube. And thank you to all our patrons who are here. I forgot we were recording this tonight. And I sent an email, or I posted we're going to do it like 20 minutes beforehand, and 100 people still showed up. So you guys are awesome. We really love your thoughts and your comments. And we love hearing what you think about these cases. Thank you so much for supporting us. We could not do this without you. Okay, Alice, you want to answer some questions?
Always.
Okay, the first one's going to be easy, but it's by two different people. So we're knocking out 2 questions. And I think more people have asked this at some point, but this is from Para Vieja and Kendra, and they both want to know if we've ever prosecuted someone who turned out to be innocent. No. Not even close. I mean, not even like a doubt. And that's the thing. Like,
I've actually had very few cases where there were even actual innocence claims. There were defenses to be made, but in no violent crime. I'm trying to think. In no violent crime was there an actual innocence defense even. In my white collar cases, yes, because they always say I didn't steal the money. They stole the money.
That's true. That's true. They do always say that. Or I didn't mean to, or it was an accident.
Yeah. I didn't know the money was flowing straight into my bank account. I know you have a record of it. I just didn't know that all that billions of dollars was coming straight to me. Thought it was a gift from Uncle Sam.
Exactly. And I think, look, the vast majority of cases are just very straightforward. The evidence is overwhelming, and the person is obviously guilty. It doesn't mean, we see people who are acquitted. We bring charges and people are acquitted. That happens. They're not innocent. They are not guilty in the eyes of the law, but that doesn't mean they didn't do it. And, I can think when I was doing death penalty litigation, there was one guy who said he didn't do it, and it was absurd. I mean, his innocence claim was absolutely absurd. He very clearly did it. I can remember one case that was It was pretty interesting case. That was the closest one where there was a guy, he was a police officer, state trooper, I think, and his wife was murdered. Well, his wife was found dead in her car. The car had been set on fire. And so most of the evidence was destroyed and all this various stuff. And the argument the defense made is that it was some sort of accident, that her car, she'd gotten into some sort of accident and the car caught on fire. And then that's what happened. And he was convicted. He was placed on death row. He appealed. He won his appeal, and the judge vacated his conviction. And he was released. He moved away and everything else. And the office had to make a decision about whether or not to appeal the judge's ruling vacating his conviction, and ended up appealing the ruling, overturned the ruling. He was recharged. He was retried, and he was convicted again. And that one was like the one that I was personally involved in that was the closest one. And I only say that because at least the defense in that case had an argument. At least they had like a viable story. Usually they don't really even have that. Usually what the defense is saying is hold the prosecution to their burden, make them prove it. They're not really offering any kind of alternative. It's just they have to prove it. If they don't prove it, you need to acquit my and that is a remarkably successful strategy. A lot of defense attorneys have a lot of success there. So it's not like most of the cases we're familiar with where there's this big alternative theory and that's what they're fighting it over. That's what you see that's the famous cases you see on the news. That's not usually how it is. Okay. I think we've answered a similar question to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because Moogloom asked it.
Okay.
So if you created a podcast that was not true crime, what would it be about?
That's a great question, actually, with all the time that we have. I guess it would have to be something I really enjoy talking about. Like, I don't know that I like gloom and doom, but I like talking to you. So I'd have to do something with you, Brett. I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I know mine's.
I know yours is horror. I would not do that with you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what would you do? What would you force me to do with you?
I think I would do something like productivity hacks. Like, I think that people can eat a lot healthier than they think they can without having these like grand cooking things. All my recipes are like 20 minutes and under because that's my stage of life, and I try to make them healthy and they taste pretty good to me and my kids eat them. So I think I would try, like,
before you continue, because there's another question this fits into. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask that question so you can answer it while doing this. WM Hunt wants to know what's your best life hack. So just go ahead.
Okay.
Tell us your best life hack.
That's my life hack, right? Is healthy foods. Like, my kids act better because there's no like sugar crashes. It's cheaper, like way cheaper to cook at home than to order out, especially as we all know, like fast food prices are rising, incredibly high, even higher, faster than say groceries are. And so little things like that where it's like, I'm not a great cook at all, but I get my kids fed in a healthy manner on a budget, and I'm able to do it while working 2 full-time jobs essentially, right? And it makes me happy to be able to do that. And so when people like ask me to give them recipes, I'm happy to do it, but I'm always like, it's not fancy, it's not gourmet, but it is healthy, it's organic, we don't use a bunch of things we don't need. They're usually super easy ingredients, things you can buy at the grocery store, because Brett, we don't live in a super fancy place. We don't have super fancy ingredients. So basically any sort of like local grocery store will have stuff like that. But it's not just cooking. I think it fits into all these things that help streamline your day to be able, and this doesn't have to be for moms. This is just for anyone who is trying to juggle like having full-time jobs and a social life, and if you want to do a podcast, those sorts of things. Like, I make aggressive use of alarms on my phone. Like, I have very short memory and have too much going on. I will forget things unless I have an alarm set on my phone. So 3 minutes before anything I have to do, including coming up to record, I have an alarm on my phone to keep me on track of everything. And I try to keep everything like 5 minutes ahead of time so that I'll only be 5 minutes late.
It's perfect, Alice. And now's the best time to announce. Coming soon, Prasa Cookbook by Alice.
With all the time that I have.
Well, no, I'll just put that together and we'll make a fortune.
With each of these like questions, I'll just give another. For
example, the people are like screaming, "Take my money, Alice!" You need to.
No, they don't. You don't want to pay for these recipes. Is the problem, right? But like, for example, there's this amazing chickpea curry which you can make vegetarian, vegan, or you can make it with meat. But like even my kids love it, and it's made with like sweet potato, coconut milk, chickpeas, and then if you wanted to put chicken in it, you could put chicken in it, and ginger, soy sauce, all these sorts of things. But throw it in your Instant Pot and it's ready in 20 minutes. I mean, I will forget to cook dinner until like 4:00 p.m. and my kids need to eat like at 5:10. And I'm like, if this can be done, if I can do it, you can too. So things like that.
I'm gonna make her do it, guys. I know you all want the cookbook. She's refusing. She's like, oh no, it's easy. I'll just tell you. And then she like gives you very vague. Well, here's some ingredients. Go forth and make it. And you know how much.
I made an excellent guacamole tonight, and it took 5 minutes. No, it took 3 minutes, guys.
Everybody's like, well, that's great, Alice. We'd love to know the recipe, but we don't have the book. So how are we gonna know? Anyway, we'll work on it. We're gonna work on it.
We'll work on it.
Okay, well, that's great. We did 3 questions, just boom, 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 like that. I don't have any life hacks.
You do
worthless.
have life hacks.
Multitask.
And I do love history podcasts, but I feel like there's so many good history podcasts out there that I don't know that I have anything to add. You do, but I'm not sure I do. There are some great history podcasts out there. I listen to all of them.
I would love to do a history podcast. That would be fantastic.
It would be super fun. I don't want to be noise in the wind. Like if there's already great podcasts, I don't want to just add to it. But if I can bring something,
never noise in the wind, Alice. Never noise.
Sometimes noise in the wind.
Okay. Well, this one's been fun, but we're gonna do another one next week. We're gonna start on a little bit longer one next week. These last 2 have been 1 episodes for those of you who like the shorter episodes, but we'll do a little bit longer case for our summer case. I don't know how long it'll last, but it's an innocence case, an actual innocence case. We'll leave it to you to decide whether or not this person is actually innocent or not. Apropos of nothing, as we record this is the 31st. Today, I think, is the 31st anniversary of the murders in West Memphis 3. So, keep those families and those boys in your memory. All right, Alice. Well, if you have nothing else to add, do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
I do not. But this was a really interesting case because of all the esoteric questions we were able to get into.
I know. Very interesting. And I can't wait to have the discussions with all of you later. Well, we will be back next week with a new case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
I keep forgetting CrimeCon is this month because I was like, I have this trip next week, and then I have the trip after that, but then I'm done. And Mr. Alice is like, CrimeCon? I was like, oh, right.
Yeah, that's kind of a big one.
It's a huge one. It's just, I live like day by day here. We try to make through each day every day.
Me too.
Okay.
Me too. Okay.
Ready to record whenever you are.
I'm ready.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Talking to that CIA guy tomorrow morning, but you don't have to join it unless you want to.
I've got something I got to do tomorrow morning.
I have a depot prep at 2:00, so I hope the call doesn't go longer than 30 minutes.
If you have to drop off, you have to drop off.
I'm hosting dinner tomorrow. Guys, that 20-minute dinner is about to come in handy. I totally forgot I'm hosting dinner tomorrow. Gosh darn it.
It's summertime, and with Pluto TV's Summer of Cinema, the streaming is easy. Stream hundreds of free movies on all your favorite devices all summer long. Chill out poolside with Mission Impossible and Transformers. Or stay cool inside watching Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Titanic, or The Wolf of Wall Street. No matter your vibe, download the Pluto TV app to spend summer doing what you love. Watching endless movies. Tell me that's not the deal of the summer. Summer of Cinema on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.